Hi, hello, and welcome to the Bad Game Hall of Fame podcast. My name is Cassidy, the curator of said Hall of Fame, webmaster of BadGameHallOfFame.com, and host of the program. In this series, I'm going to be asking various friends and guests to tell me all about their favorite bad video games, and getting to the bottom of what makes them stand out as special. So stay a while and listen, why don't you? See if something we discuss strikes your fancy. Give bad games a chance. You may know them as the webmaster of The Obscuratory, scouring the depths for games unplayed and unknown. He is a teller of weird true stories from video game history, the revealer of the Writer Society secrets. It's Phil Salvador!
Hello.
How you doing today, bud?
I'm doing pretty great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Not a problem at all. Here for our second episode of this Bad Game Hall of Fame podcast. Here to discuss another wonderful game. What have you been up to recently, though? How have you been doing? What have you been on the internet doing recently?
Things have been well. Right now we're doing a big push to organize for panels for Super MagFest 2020 coming up in 3 months, which is worrying, but we're pushing through. It's going to be really good content this time. More to come on that, but otherwise things are kind of as they are. It's been a busy year. Volunteering with game history stuff, writing articles about weird things, researching very strange games no one has talked about in 20 years for good reason.
Doing good work, I have to say, as always. The Obscuratory comes highly recommended. I think I found you... Man, what was the first article I would have read from you? It probably would have been for some weird budget FPS or something to that effect. Some weirdo first-person shooter thing.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't tell you what it is offhand, though. I try to find these things out, but...
I feel like that and Eastern Mind was like one of the big ones.
Very potentially.
But I appreciate it. Thank you.
So enough about that. Enough about things that are interesting. Let's talk about something that's terrible. Let's talk about a bad game, why don't we? A bad game that you actually happen to like. No, I should say that is the conceit of this little podcast, that these are our favorite bad games, so maybe I shouldn't be so harsh on it.
As we were going in, there were a couple I was like, this is one of the worst games I've played, but I don't want to talk about it because it's awful. So this is one that I actually do enjoy, though. So.
And what is the name of this game? What is your favorite bad game, I should ask?
This game is called Gooch Grundy's X-Decathlon.
Oh, I know it well.
Which it just sounds obscene, just the name, but...
It came out in this wonderful period in the late 90s where parody games, and specifically this one developer, Parody Interactive, was putting out a bulk of content, shit like Star Wart and Pissed in place of Mist. You had the Dear Avenger series, which Simon & Schuster was putting out, Who Wants to Beat Up a Millionaire. And in a similar vein to all these sort of games, you had games that were a parody of video games in general, of the general idea, the conceit of interactive software. And this is where I believe Microforum International comes through to bring us Gooch Grundy and his X-Decathlon. Could you summate the game? Like, what's the game about? What's the sort of genre, if you could pigeonhole it into one?
So, I guess nominally it's a sports game. It is supposed to be a series of wacky sports-type events. It really is just kind of like a minigame collection in practice. It's just kind of 10 different games you can play through that are really not connected to anything that resembles human sports, I guess.
No, yeah. No. And who is our protagonist, I should ask, by the way?
So the protagonist is a man named Gooch Grundy, who is a total loser. He's this, like, Chris Farley-looking dude. He lives at home with his parents. He has no job, sleeps in all day. And he, one day, discovers a portal to a world in which he appears to be the world's most famous athlete. So he enters into these competitions that kind of play into his lack of talent and ability to throw pizza at people and general non-athleticism. Again, not quite sports, not really sports, but that's what he gets mixed up in.
What are some of the events that we're looking at here? What are some of our... I'm trying to remember offhand. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of these. There's one where you push a hippo.
Yeah, so that's one of the big ones, is the Hippo Run, which I think is kind of a crucible for all the game's successes and failures. But I've got a list here. Some of the highlights are the computer toss, the nice doggy jump, in which you have to jump over a large dog that tries to eat you.
The classic Olympic game. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's one of the ancient ones. We've got full contact figure skating, which I think was one of the only ones that actually kind of cracked me up just from the title alone. And my favorite is of 3D Maze, which is basically just like a competitive version of the Windows 95 screensaver.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sports. That's
Yeah, naturally. I sort of get. Are you familiar with Lester the Unlikely, the platformer game where you play as Lester the Unlikely hero?
with the nerd, yeah, who like runs around. It's like Prince of Persia, but with a dork. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, and he runs away and he'll deliberately like eschew your inputs so he can like run away from enemies or whatever. That's almost the sort of vibe I get for Grooch Grundy, or Gooch Grundy. I say Grooch Grundy. Doesn't matter. It's a comedy name. We can embellish it if we want to. We can add some syllables if we want to. So what about this game makes it bad, I should ask?
So, basically all the 10 games are, if they're not like busted in some way, they just don't make sense. The big problem recurring through all of them is that most of the games, all the characters are in the game at once, so it's like you versus 3 different competitors, and a big part of the game is you can fight the people as you play. So going back to Hippo Run, which is the one we mentioned earlier. Hippo Run is a game in which you are on a racetrack and you have to push a hippo down the racetrack, and it's a button mashing game. But at any point, you can step away from the hippo and just start beating the shit out of the person next to you. And it just completely destroys the game. Like, there's no hippo eventually just becomes everyone just kind of beating each other up and like throwing pizza at each other. And you don't really have to push the hippo at some point. It lasts maybe 3 to 4 times longer than it should. And every game is like this. I think multiple games on the list are just either people fighting each other or people fighting each other in a maze. And that's just kind of what the game boils down to. The controls are often terrible and unresponsive. The game concepts just don't make a whole lot of sense sometimes. As a minigame collection or a sports game or a competitive game or anything it's trying to be, it's just kind of a mess.
Yes, I'd say that's fair, and especially considering that it's not just one perspective the game's trying to tackle either. So it's not just like one bad control scheme, it's like 4 or 5 bad control schemes across isometric view, across profile view, side-scrolling stuff, behind the back stuff for some of the 3D games they have, like the 3D Maze. I think there's like a roller derby too.
Yeah, there's a... Yeah.
So they find fun and unique ways to mess with the controls in each of these, and all devolving into just basically beating people up, like you said, that the conceits of the games, the intent of the game maybe falls apart as you just fall into the sort of bad beat-em-up mechanics they have.
Exactly, yeah. And the ones that do break from that are the computer toss and the nice doggy jump, which are those kind of games where you have to like set your angle and set your power and try to jump over something. But the game just moves so fast and the controls are so unresponsive, it's difficult to really get a handle on how you're actually supposed to angle yourself and anything. Those ones are somehow even the worst. Like, they control the worst out of any of them, despite being separate from the rest of the game's issues.
Would you say they're the worst parts of the game? What are the most frustrating minigames in the game, I would ask?
I think, honestly, those ones are. Just because it's the kind of thing where it's like, every character has 3 heats. It's like you have round 1, you run forward, try to throw a computer, and you usually miss. And then it goes through every other character, and you watch them all go. So you get, like, a minute or 2 between attempts to throw the computer.
And there's no skip button that I can remember from that?
Can't remember, no. Or jump over the dog, throw the computer, same control, same kind of thing. So I think those ones are frustrating just because of the lack of immediacy. Like, when you're playing full contact figure skating, it's a disaster, but you press a button and for the most part you can see what you're supposed to be doing. Computer toss, it's like you messed up, now like here's a timeout period, gonna come back in a minute or 2, and then you'll get another shot and it's gonna be another 5 seconds of gameplay. So that's, I think, what makes those ones especially frustrating.
Completely understandable. Minigame collections are hard to get down. I feel like we should say, like, it's very easy to mess this sort of thing up. To defend game developers.
It's rare when, we have a minigame collection that, there's always going to be a couple duds, even like, Mario parties and whatnot always had a couple ones that were screwed up. It's rare for all 10 games to be awful.
Yeah, at least you would go in with one game you have like a clear vision for, then like, okay, let's pad it out with like 9 ones that kind of suck. But this one's going to be great. This one doesn't seem like they had anything at the ready. They kind of just threw everything against the wall. It doesn't matter what sticked and what didn't. Maybe it all slid off the wall and onto the floor at some point. But you gotta scoop it up in the bowl and serve it anyway.
Yeah.
That analogy got away from me.
but as you say that, though, like, looking at the list, like, apart from maybe the computer toss just because it was such a unique game, and maybe the 3D Maze because they learned they could do 3D, like, none of them are standing out to me as being, like, the game of particular focus. Like, they all seem to have been phoned in, which is kind of remarkable, I guess.
Yes. So with all that being said, now we've completely torn this game apart. What is it you like about this game?
So I was trying to think of how to frame this. What I love about Gooch Grundy is that it is a game that is trying exceptionally hard. It is trying very hard to be funny and extreme, and not edgy in the sense of like, you know, like the Joker from Suicide Squad edgy, but edgy in the sense of just like doing like really intense CGI graphics and guitar music and like
it sells
catchphrases.
itself. It's selling itself hard.
It tries very hard to be itself, and it falls so flat in its face. It's wonderful. Like, I think if I had played this at the time, 20 years ago, it would have been very annoying. 20 years removed, with Gooch Grundy no longer being a going concern, it's amazing. It is trying so hard to be, like, okay, I keep mentioning the one called the Nice Doggy Jump. I feel the need to explain this one a little bit more.
Please do.
The Nice Doggy Jump is, again, another game. It's like a long jump type game. You press a button to run, and then you have to hold a button down to angle your jump and jump over a pit, where a giant, like, 10-foot tall CGI dog jumps out and tries to attack you. Never really explained why. It just kind of speaks for itself. I mean, I get kind of fed up when people say, like, oh, it's a plot hole, there's no explanation. But this was something where it's like, hold on a second.
Let's pause for a second.
Not quite sure what's going on with this whole conceit here. But it's so much, and I don't know why it's so much, and with all the time removed from it trying to be like an exciting, interesting game, it's great. I think it's really spectacular.
It's just an earnestness you appreciate, you would say then. You would say that just the effort put into this complete disaster and the charmingness of these wacky ideas that with removed from context.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, it should be explained, like, it is a live action game. All the characters are in live action, which is great.
Digitized sprites.
Yeah, and at the bottom there is a little graphic. You have, your little portrait of your character, and as the game goes along, they will scream or react to what's happening in the game, like on a little TV in the corner, and it's extra. It's so extra. And I love it. But even more than that, though, one particular thing that I think makes Gooch Grundy work is the fact that it is a minigame collection. If this was a narrative game in which you had to play through all 10 minigames, it would be unbearable.
It would be a slog. Yes.
Exactly, yeah. But because you can, and there is a championship mode where you can play through a series of events, but because you can just, like, jump into, what's one of the games? Javelin Catch. Which is actually, that's a good game.
Good idea.
Too. So you can just jump into Javelin Catch, and you can play that for a minute and say, this is terrible, and quit it, and then go to, crazy climbing, and it's an entirely different kind of terrible game. You don't have to play through in sequential order. You can just kind of jump around and see, what parts of the game are awful, enjoy it for half an hour, and say, that's enough, and stop for a while. And I think compared to so many other bad games where you have to muddle your way through 2 to 3 hours of awful game to get to the one joke, like, it's not like the Nicolas Cage Wicker Man, where you have to watch an hour and a half of a terrible movie, and then you get to see Nicolas Cage punch people in a bear suit, and, like, you can just kind of sample the terrible parts and enjoy them. And I think that is it makes it a rare game that's so bad it's good, not just in terms of, like, all the extreme content, but in terms of the mechanics being so bad, you don't have to stick with them, and I think that makes a huge difference.
Yes, having the full range to pick from all these games at the top, something I really appreciate as someone who has to play through a number of bad games and have to, suffer through these narratives to catch, like, the one moment of gold or whatever, the one thing that people, like, will come back to or put into their highlight videos, and having to slog through, like, hours between stuff, whereas this is just, like, it's digestible, it's accessible, it's terrible, but it's right there for you, and you can duck out whenever you want and switch to something else that's equally as bad in different ways, like you said.
Exactly.
And there's a merit to that. There's an absolute merit to that that I have to applaud them for.
Like, I think a close comparison might be, like, Action 52, in terms of just, like, it's the
absolutely
amount of stuff available and how little there is in each one. You can just kind of pop in and say, this sucks, go to the next one. I think that's what makes the game work. And I guess kind of what makes Action 52 work as well, in terms of just being a bad game you can enjoy.
I'd absolutely agree in that, it's the variety. It's a variety of things on offer. There's games to play, things to see. You can always be moving. You can put a 5-minute timer on for, like, one game and be done with it even before that timer goes up. But the point being that You can just swiftly move from thing to thing until you find something that maybe sticks with you, maybe doesn't. Sticks with you in a good way, sticks with you in a bad way. It's just always something else that's like right down the line that you can skip to if you want to.
Exactly, yeah.
What would you change about the game? If there's one improvement you would make to it, one discrete little difference you would make?
If there's one improvement I could make, I think the combat stuff seems funny in theory. Like, that is something that... I mean, I think everyone probably has a favorite multiplayer game with some kind of slapstick violence in it. And I think that Gooch Grunt, that could have been something working in its favor. I think as it is right now, being able to just like run off and beat everyone up doesn't add anything to the game, even in terms of comedy value. It just kind of slogs it down. I think they could have redone. There could have been some way to refocus or redo that to amplify it for comedy's sake, as opposed to just being, what it devolves into.
Sure, having more mechanics built around it, just like having more variety of ways to attack people other than just like the push or shove that you get with
or anything that was optimized for it just being a goofy addition to the game, as opposed to it sucking all the air out of the game every time you get the opportunity to punch somebody. Because I think it's also, in this game, you have like a stamina meter, and once you punch someone down, they have to slowly recover stamina, so you can just kind of stand on top of them, just keep wailing as they stand up, prevent them from moving. Like, there's just a lot of things I could have done to amplify the fact that it's this kind of unnecessary addition that you can, fight someone in the figure skating game, as opposed to it just kind of getting in the way as it is right now.
Yes. And there's also like a variety of characters you can pick from. I don't know how many offhand there are to pick from, but I know there's like this like weird gorilla man, this Donkey Kong looking Sasquatch dude. There's an Amazonian lady.
His name is Larry Kong.
That's right. It's
really great.
It's very subtle.
The characters, though, I love because it reminded me, like what you were saying earlier about Lesher the Unlikely, where it's this kind of like sort of underdoggy misfit perspective. The bad guy in Gooch Grundy is a strong guy named Buff Manley, whose his entire character is that he works out, and that's the character. Like, he's strong and therefore he's bad. And it kind of just cues you into the mindset where it's like the hero is this lazy guy who eats pizza. The hero and the bad guy is a villain who, is ripped, and that's it.
The nerd versus jock archetype brought to its logical conclusion, where the nerd gets a revenge fantasy by making a middling piece of 97 software for Windows, where you take your revenge in excruciating ways.
Exactly. It toes the line between being, like a nerd versus jocks fantasy and just being like, hey, this guy works out, let's kill him. Like, it's somewhere stuck in the middle, and it's kind of amusing, but
it's a little muddied, but we'll take it where we can get it.
So the characters definitely do add something to the game.
Who would you recommend this game to? Who would you say, hey, I'm looking at your taste in games, I got a game for you. Check out Gooch Grundy.
I know there is a faction of people who like cheesy full motion video games. I think this fits right into the cross section of people who enjoy FMV games and people who enjoy party games, which I think, the more I think about it, kind of occupies that exact same slot of like streamers performatively screaming at games. The more I think about it. But it's the same thing. Like, it is a bad party game that also happens to have terrible cheesy acting. Because there are live action segments. Like, there's videos. They have a host who interviews the characters and talks to them about their exploits. And of course, the host, he's a terrible actor. His accent goes in and out. He's always looking down at his notes. Which is kind of telling, but it kind of fits right. It is one of the few games I can think of that would probably not lose anything if everyone was just like a little bit drunk while playing it.
Yes.
Since the game is kind of unplayable as it is.
We should mention that there is an actual multiplayer for this game.
You're playing against bots, but you can have a second player. And I think that's one thing that works for it too, is that you can't be competitive with this game. If you take it seriously, you have lost.
Yeah, you are a fool at that point.
There's no way to play this at any level, like any competitive skill level, since it's just so totally borked up. But
tell it to the speedrunners, buddy. Tell it to the people who are like grinding hours a day to get the tech perfect in this game. Tell them about that competitive edge.
Gooch Grundy's esports now.
Damn right. The X-Decathlon finally made it to the big stage.
But I think it works in that sense. It works in the sense of it being a novelty sampler party game, I think.
I would accept that.
Just on its own terms as a sports game, it doesn't hold up, but it's just so entertaining.
I will accept these answers. I will accept that as a perfectly succinct recommendation. So yeah, that's Gooch Grundy's X-Decathlon, folks. I feel like we've covered all the bases we need to there. You can see it now in a theater near you, buy it on a game shelf near you. Probably not.
Cannot wait for the extended Gooch Grundy Universe cinematic series.
Damn right. No, where we got Larry Kong gets his own movie franchise coming out of this. There's going to be 3 installments in that.
I heard they cast The Rock as Buff Manley. Kind of a controversial choice, but...
Perfect casting if you ask me. I mean, what else is he doing? And does any scenes in this game take place in the jungle? Because that's where The Rock feels right at home. So
I will say this before we wrap up. It is very unclear where this game takes place. It is a combination of, like, underwater reefs and what appears to be, like, a decommissioned industrial waste site. I've got nothing. It's not.
Takes place in general video game land, where things transition with no rhyme or reason between different locations.
Oh yeah, it never occurred to me until just now that the game is technically set in a sports stadium, and then just kind of goes to a waste site. It's like, you know what? I respect that. I appreciate. Yeah. Again, I don't want to be like cinema sins. Look at this. It's not taking place in a stadium. Like it's just it's being ridiculous, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate that it's not trying to be serious and not trying to tie itself up in a mythology. It just kind of is.
And it's a standalone product, and it stands on its own merits.
Exactly, yeah.
So, with all that said and done, all that's left to do is ask where can folk find you on the internet, and also real life since you have some conventions coming up.
Well, you can find the Obscuratory on obscuratory.com. And there's all the links to various social media stuff in there. But I will be at Super MagFest 2020 in National Harbor, Maryland, coming up on January 2nd through 5th, 2020, which I realize is very close to the new year, but that's how it goes.
Yeah. Are you ever going to come down to Portland Retro Gaming at some point, eventually, hopefully?
I have really wanted to. I finally went to the West Coast for the first time. It is lovely, like the Pacific Northwest, I should say. Seattle was lovely. It is very expensive to get up there.
Sure is.
I hope to make it 1 year, but not in the cards for this year. Maybe 2020. We'll see.
I'll make it out to the East Coast at some point, maybe then, and we will have our meetup, and I'll high five you, and we'll play a game of Gooch Grundy. We'll load it up on the old laptop and see to it.
Gonna start practicing for the next 2 years.
I still haven't found a way to close this podcast out. Do you have any recommendations for like a closing line, like a cool ending, like coda thing I can say?
Novelty game over music.
That's pretty good. There's like some sort of like audio clip from like it's like someone saying game over, or just like the song itself, the music sting itself.
Yeah, there's gotta be. I mean, game over, yeah, is overused. But there's gotta be some weird game over out there you can use.
That's what you should have done in the beginning.
That was Phil Salvador of the Obscuratory, and this was the second episode of the Bad Game Hall of Fame podcast. I'm recording this little outro 1 week and one sore throat later, but if you liked what you heard, you should check out BadGameHallOfFame.com, where I write about bad games on the semi-regular. We have yet more guests lined up for this little project, so hope for more episodes in the very near future, more bad games to be discussed at length in audio form. So remember, until next time, there's a story behind every bad game. I think bad games might be the most interesting, though.